In the annals of history, there are tales of courage and determination that transcend the boundaries of time. One such story that continues to captivate our imagination is that of Harry, the remarkable escape tunnel that represents the unwavering spirit of individuals in the face of adversity. Join us as we take a look at one of the most iconic tunnels in the world. Harry, the escape tunnel, was conceived within the confines of Stalag Luft III, a prisoner of war POW camp during World War II. Located in present-day Poland, it was designed to hold captured Allied airmen who posed a significant threat to the Nazis. Among the prisoners, a group of resourceful individuals began planning an audacious escape, believing in their hearts that freedom was within their reach. For a quick backstory, the prison where these POWs were trying to escape from was supposed to be inescapable. After their other prisons had proven to be too porous, as many POWs had escaped, the Nazis decided to build a maximum security camp 100 miles southeast of Berlin, and they really paid attention to making this camp as escape-proof as possible. For one, they made sure to build the huts that housed the prisoners off the ground to make it impossible, at least more difficult, for the prisoners to dig tunnels. But that wasn't all. They outfitted the entire underground of the huts, about 9 feet below, with microphones. Obviously, the idea that was if any digging happened, it would be heard all over the camp. That was still not all. The camp itself was built on yellow sand, which was supposed to be difficult to dig through. Plus, it was yellow sand. If the prisoners had been doing any digging, they would stand out. However, the Allied flyboys that were imprisoned in Stalag Luft III were huge risk-takers with a lot of ingenuity, and that was something that the Nazis couldn't have prepared for. The imprisoned flyboys in Hut 104, composed of Canadian, British, and other European military men, worked for almost a year trying to build their escape route. By the way, regardless of what the movie showed, there were no Americans involved in the operation. Anyway, the prisoners knew that they would suffer 10 days in solitary confinement, according to the rules of the Geneva Convention, if they were caught. But they were willing to take the risk, and they did, constructing 3 different tunnels that they codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. Construction of the tunnels began in secret, deep beneath the cold, unforgiving soil. And considering that this construction wasn't exactly sanctioned by the Nazis, the POWs had limited resources. So they had to rely on their ingenuity, crafting makeshift usable tools out of anything they could find. Powdered tins of milk that were sent in by the Red Cross were used as excavation tools. The tins of milk were also used as lamps for light, using pajama drawstrings as wicks for the lamp. Remember that they still had the obstacles that the Nazis thought of to overcome. So for the yellow sand problem, the diggers had to work either in their long johns or sans clothing altogether to avoid staining their clothes. And as for yellow sand being more difficult to dig through, well, they just had to put in more effort. To overcome the microphone problem, the prisoners decided to dig more than 30 feet through. It was a lot of work, which is why it took close to a year to achieve, but they wanted that escape. As the tunnels grew deeper, the prisoners faced other problems. First off, if they didn't reinforce the walls, the tunnels would cave in on themselves and destroy all the work that had happened up to that point. So they gathered thousands of wooden bedboards and used them to board up the walls of the tunnels, which by the way were only about 2 feet wide. The boards were also used to build ladders to make the descent down the tunnels a bit easier. Thousands of blankets also found their place in the whole situation, serving as sound mufflers as they were attached to the walls. More problems that the POWs encountered were with lower oxygen levels and less light. And wouldn't you know it, these guys came up with solutions to those as well. For the light problem, they tapped from the camp's own electrical supply, using a stolen wire to power a string of light bulbs. And for the oxygen problem, They made a makeshift ventilation air pump system using hockey sticks, knapsacks, and ping pong paddles. They also came up with a transportation system to move the sand that they were digging out. The entire system was basically a trolley thing that was moved by ropes, plus switchover junctions that they named after Piccadilly Circus and Leicester Square. Speaking of moving sand, disposing of the sand was something else that was a challenge. But the POWs were equal to the task. They devised a plan to distribute the soil inconspicuously. Prisoners working in the gardens above ground would secretly scatter the soil, carefully mixing it with the existing earth to avoid detection. Another important job in this operation was serving as lookout, and these guys had really subtle signals, like turning the page of a book or fiddling with a shoelace, signals that were commonplace enough to not draw attention of the patrollers. The Allied flyboys were not just thinking about their immediate escape, though. They also considered what would happen once they left the camp. So in exchange for things like chocolate, soap, and coffee, which the Red Cross brought for the prisoners, but Germans generally didn't have access to, the POWs got some cameras and travel documents from the prison guards. With those, they were able to forge identity cards, passports, and travel passes. The plan was to break out 200 POWs. So there were many IDs, passports, and travel passes to be forged. Unfortunately, the Nazis ended up discovering one of the tunnels before it was completed. The tunnel that was discovered was Tom, and the Nazis were so proud of the discovery, they called in photographers to snap the evidence before it was destroyed. But because no one was in the tunnel when it was found, no one was sent into solitary confinement for trying to escape. Work continued on Dick and Harry, but eventually the prisoners decided to turn Dick into a storage space, so all the focus was challenged to Harry. And in a couple of months, specifically at the end of winter in 1944, Harry was finished. Escape was imminent. The prisoners prepared for their escape, choosing a moonless night to maximize the risk of detection. On the fateful evening, a group of brave souls ventured into the depths of Harry, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Unfortunately, the first person to crawl out on the other side found that the end of the tunnel was a couple of feet short of the forest, which would have been a better cover for people escaping prison. This added a lot more hiccups to the escape plan, as escapees had to wait for the all clear before darting into the relative safety of the forest. At this point, it was obvious that breaking out 200 men would not be as achievable as they initially thought it would be. A partial tunnel collapse and the 1-hour blackout during a midnight air raid only made the 200 men escape seem even more impossible. By the time the tunnel was discovered by a Nazi soldier that fell into the exit shaft, only 76 prisoners had broken out of the camp. As it turns out, those who didn't make the escape were actually the lucky ones. The escapees faced numerous challenges as they emerged on the other side of Harry. Disguised in civilian clothing, they dispersed into the surrounding countryside, hoping to evade capture and make their way back to Allied territory. Unfortunately, their escape did not go entirely unnoticed, and a massive manhunt ensued. For 2 weeks, the escapees were hunted, and unfortunately, 73 of the 76 were caught. Worse still, 50 of the 73 were executed as some sort of a warning to the other prisoners, even though this was a violation of the Geneva Convention. While the escape itself wasn't exactly a success, the construction of Harry certainly was. That stood the test of time thanks to the quality of its construction, but also due to the fact that it went untouched for close to 7 decades. Interest in the tunnel was stirred by the 1963 American epic war film titled The Great Escape, but it remained undisturbed because the Soviets were not exactly proud of what it represented, and no one else could go near it because it was behind the Iron Curtain. Years after the Cold War, though, British archaeologists excavated the tunnel and uncovered many of its secrets. The bedboards that were used to reinforce the walls of the tunnel still stood. The board ladder was still intact, And the ventilation shaft creation was not just still there, it was also working. The excavationist also found bits of old metal buckets, hammers, and crowbars all around the tunnel, signs of the elbow grease that was put into escaping a seemingly escape-proof prison. Interestingly, excavationists also discovered another tunnel called George, but the exact position of that tunnel had never been charted. Plus, the POWs could not even try another prison escape via the tunnel because they had all been moved to other camps. We would all have liked for the escape story to have had a different ending, but maybe there's some small comfort in the fact that even under captivity, hundreds of humans could work together to build something that remains standing for decades. Like stories like these, make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.